The U.S. Navy's aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. has entered the Caribbean, sailing just off Venezuela's coast. The most powerful warship on Earth now sits within striking distance of Caracas, ready to remind the world why Uncle Sam always finds more room in the budget for warships than for welfare. This move adds to a fast-growing U.S. military buildup across Latin America, from thousands of American troops in Panama to destroyers and aircraft operating near Venezuelan waters, a full force standing by, ready to unleash havoc on Venezuela at the very moment their president gives the word. But Washington isn't the only power making moves. In Moscow, Vladimir Putin has been quick to expand his circle of political misfits, throwing his support behind Nicolás Maduro. In the past few days, he's signed new military and energy agreements with Venezuela and dispatched Russian advisors to the region. Officially, the United States calls this an anti-narcotics operation, but few are convinced that Tony Montana's pre-workout is the real reason. Is this about drug routes, or is it a new front in America's power struggle with its rivals? If you enjoy what you're seeing, like and subscribe and help the channel grow. Now let's dive into the analysis. In the last few days, the military picture around Venezuela has changed dramatically. The arrival of the USS Gerald R. in the Caribbean marked the beginning of a major show of strength. Within days, the United States expanded its presence with 8 Navy warships, a nuclear-powered submarine, and thousands of additional troops reinforcing the carrier strike group. Marines under U.S. Southern Command have begun live fire drills aboard an amphibious assault ship near Venezuelan waters, the usual cure for jarhead boredom when the waiting gets too long. So why this sudden surge of power? What is driving such an overwhelming show of force so close to Venezuela's shores? To understand that, we need to look at what Washington is saying about it. According to Washington, the massive buildup around Venezuela is not a prelude to war, but a mission of security. Officials describe it as part of an expanded campaign against transnational crime and narcotics networks that threaten the stability of the Western Hemisphere. In their view, Venezuela has become a permissive environment for drug traffickers, a key transit route that allows narcotics to move through the Caribbean and eventually reach the United States. At the Pentagon, spokespeople have framed the operation as a defensive measure, designed to protect the American homeland and its regional partners. The message is clear. The United States is acting against what it calls narco networks that operate with the tacit support of corrupt officials and armed groups within Venezuela. Pentagon Press Secretary Sean Parnell put it plainly: "We are bolstering our capacity to detect, monitor, and disrupt illicit actors that compromise the safety and prosperity of the United States and our allies in the hemisphere." Yet behind the confident words, critics and regional leaders are asking the same question. If this operation is truly about drug trafficking, why does it require an aircraft carrier, thousands of troops, and a fleet of warships positioned within striking distance of Venezuela? We know America loves its firepower thick, but is this show of force really necessary? To get to the heart of that question, we first need to look at Venezuela itself, its role in the regional drug trade, and whether the amount of narcotics moving through its territory toward the United States truly justifies the buildup of such a powerful military force. When it comes to the drug trade, Venezuela is not the main source but an important passageway. In 2018, U.S. monitoring data showed that around 210 metric tons of the devil's powder moved through Venezuelan territory, accounting for roughly 7 to 8% of the total flow heading toward the United States. Analysts suggest that figure has remained relatively consistent in recent years. By comparison, Guatemala handled an estimated 1,400 metric tons in the same year, more than 6 times the amount moving through Venezuelan routes. Most of this confidence booster plant originates in Colombia, crossing into Venezuela through remote border regions and traveling north along its coastline and air corridors before reaching the Caribbean. The Maduro government maintains that it is combating trafficking, frequently announcing anti-narcotics operations and naval patrols, yet Washington and independent observers point to corruption and weak enforcement that allow these networks to persist. The reality is that Venezuela's role in the regional drug trade is limited in scale, raising doubts about whether such a vast U.S. military buildup can truly be justified by the size of the threat it poses. In Caracas, President Nicolás Maduro echoes the concern shared by many analysts and regional observers that the U.S. military buildup is not simply about drugs, but about targeting Venezuela's sovereignty. Like other skeptics, he argues that Washington is using the fight against narcotics as a cover for political and military pressure. Speaking to national television earlier this year, Maduro warned that the United States is seeking a regime change through military threat, calling it the biggest threat that has been seen on our continent in the last 100 years. Local news outlets have amplified that message, describing the deployment of U.S. forces near Venezuelan waters as a provocation aimed at destabilizing the region and testing Venezuela's resolve. From Washington's perspective, the issue runs deeper than the drug trade. The United States has refused to recognize Nicolás Maduro as Venezuela's legitimate leader since 2019, when it threw its support behind opposition figures aligned with Juan Guaidó and, more recently, members of the Democratic Unitary Platform, a coalition viewed as the country's democratic alternative. For Caracas, this foreign backing of its political opposition is seen as evidence that the current military pressure is not about interdiction or security, but about enforcing a change in government by force. And Maduro, like a prom queen no one asked to dance with, went looking for a new partner. This growing tension has deepened Caracas's partnership with Moscow. In recent months, Venezuela and Russia have signed a series of new agreements covering defense cooperation, energy development, mining, and financial support. Just this past week, Russia's parliament ratified a landmark strategic partnership treaty first signed in May 2025, a document that strengthens cooperation across key sectors, including security, mineral extraction, transportation, communications, and counterterrorism. Under the Defense Accord, Venezuela will receive expanded training programs for its armed forces, modernization of Russian-made Sukhoi fighter jets, and upgraded radar and missile systems for coastal defense. At the same time, the energy and mining dimension of these agreements has opened the door to new Russian investments in Venezuela's heavy crude oil fields, joint ventures in gold and lithium extraction, and the creation of a binational investment bank aimed at financing infrastructure and development projects. Moscow's strategic goal is clear: to reinforce its influence in the Western Hemisphere and secure long-term access to Venezuela's vast reserves of energy and minerals. Like an overly zealous prom king, Russia too wants to dig deep into Venezuela's inviting soil. The Russian Foreign Ministry has publicly affirmed its stance on the U.S. military presence in the Caribbean, stating that it confirms our firm support for the Venezuelan leadership in defending its national sovereignty, and denouncing what it called the excessive use of military force by the United States in the region. And now that I've mentioned natural reserves, perhaps the answer lies beneath Venezuela's soil. Long before the warships and sanctions, this nation was known for its immense wealth in oil, gold, and rare minerals. It holds some of the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, vast natural gas fields, and expanding deposits of lithium and coltan, resources that power everything from electric vehicles to advanced weapon systems. Considering this, it becomes easier to understand why Washington would commit such overwhelming military power to the region. The deployment of an aircraft carrier and thousands of troops may have less to do with narcotics and more to do with Washington's own addiction, an uncontrollable need to secure influence over resource-rich nations. And Venezuela may hold the purest dose of all. To understand Venezuela's vast natural resources, we'll have to look at some numbers. Venezuela holds a resource portfolio few nations can rival. Analysts estimate the country possesses around 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the largest on Earth, placing it ahead of even Saudi Arabia. Alongside oil, the nation has vast natural gas reserves, with official figures citing nearly 200 trillion cubic feet and an underexplored mineral corridor stretching across the Orinoco Belt that contains enormous deposits of gold, bauxite, coltan, and lithium. These reserves place Venezuela among the world's most resource-endowed nations. Yet decades of mismanagement, corruption, and international sanctions have left much of its wealth untapped. Despite holding more oil than any other country, Venezuela produces only a fraction of its potential output. Years of underinvestment and the collapse of its state oil company, PDVSA, have crippled infrastructure that once made it a dominant exporter. According to energy analysts, daily production has fallen to levels last seen in the 1940s, while refineries operate at minimal capacity. In contrast, countries like Saudi Arabia, with smaller reserves but stronger foreign partnerships and stable production systems, continue to shape the global oil market. Venezuela, on the other hand, is sitting on an ocean of crude it can barely extract. That's like having a Bugatti with no paved road to drive it on. Its mineral wealth tells a similar story. The Orinoco Mining Arc, an expanse covering over 111,000 square kilometers, is believed to hold some of the world's richest deposits of gold and rare minerals, yet much of it remains under informal control, plagued by illegal mining and environmental destruction. For nations competing in the global race for energy security and critical materials, these vast, untapped reserves make Venezuela more than a troubled petrostate. They make it a potential prize. And for Washington, Moscow, and even Beijing, whoever holds influence over this land of buried wealth holds leverage over the next chapter of the world's energy order. Now that we see what's at stake in the broader picture, the U.S. military buildup makes a grim kind of sense. Political analysts suggest that beyond the stated goal of fighting narcotics, Washington's real objective is to tighten the noose around Nicolás Maduro's government and test how far Caracas can be pushed before it fractures. The deployment of an aircraft carrier, destroyers, and special operations forces so close to Venezuelan shores gives the United States a full spectrum of military options, from precision airstrikes on strategic targets to a sustained campaign of pressure designed to make the regime implode from within. Inside Venezuela, years of economic collapse, hyperinflation, and corruption have left the population weary, and opposition networks remain active despite repression. Some experts believe Washington is counting on this internal weakness, using the threat of military power to amplify political and social cracks until the government buckles. Others warn that such pressure could easily spiral into direct confrontation. If the standoff escalates beyond controlled tension, an armed conflict could redraw alliances and borders across Latin America, pulling global powers like Russia and China into a volatile regional crisis. The stakes are enormous. A miscalculation could ignite the largest geopolitical shock in the Western Hemisphere in decades, destabilizing not only Venezuela, but its neighbors, and forcing the world to confront a new kind of power struggle, one where oil, ideology, and global influence collide. The coming weeks will tell what happens next. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, tap subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next in this geopolitical tug-of-war. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.